Blood trickled down Judge Eleanor Mitchell's cheek as Detective Caldwell's boot connected with her face. The courtroom froze in horror. Nobody moved except the three people in the back row who silently reached for their badges. Caldwell's empire was about to crumble. Before we dive into this shocking story of justice and retribution, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on more true stories of justice prevailing against all odds. What would you do if you witnessed such a brazen attack on our justice system? Let's find out how this corrupt detective's single moment of rage led to his entire criminal network being dismantled forever. Judge Eleanor Mitchell had never taken the easy path. At 52 years old, she was one of only 4 black female federal judges in the entire state, a position she had earned through 25 years of relentless dedication to the law. From the moment she passed the bar exam, Eleanor knew that the justice system would demand twice the effort from her for half the recognition afforded to her white male counterparts. Her courtroom on the 3rd floor of the federal courthouse had become known throughout the district for 2 things: meticulous attention to legal detail and unwavering fairness, regardless of who stood before her bench. Most attorneys respected her sharp mind and encyclopedic knowledge of precedent, though a silent undercurrent of resentment flowed from certain law enforcement officials who found her scrutiny of their procedures too thorough for comfort. The case that would change everything had seemed routine when it first crossed her desk 3 weeks earlier. Officer James Wilson, a 12-year veteran of the police force, had allegedly been beaten while in custody after reporting suspicious activities within his precinct. The official report claimed Wilson had attacked another officer and sustained injuries during restraint, but the medical evidence told a different story. When Eleanor assigned herself to the case, eyebrows raised throughout the courthouse, but none more visibly than those of Detective Richard Caldwell, the 47-year-old head of internal affairs who had personally overseen the investigation into Wilson's allegations. During preliminary hearings, Caldwell's hostility toward Judge Mitchell manifested in subtle ways, interrupting her questions, sighing audibly during her rulings, and once even muttering under his breath when she excluded certain testimony. Eleanor first noticed the threatening messages 2 days after the preliminary hearing. A plain envelope delivered to her chambers contained a single sheet of paper with the words, "Some judges don't know when to step aside," typed in the center. Her clerk, Tamika Jackson, a bright young law school graduate with aspirations of following Eleanor's path to the bench, reported seeing patrol cars driving slowly past the courthouse during late evenings when they worked on case files. "Judge Mitchell, I think someone's trying to intimidate you," Tamika had said, concern etched across her face. "They picked the wrong judge," Eleanor replied, placing the message in an evidence bag. As the days passed, the messages escalated. "Your father should have taught you better. Not everyone belongs on the bench. Some lessons need physical teaching." The last reference to her father cut deepest. Marcus Mitchell Sr. had been a civil rights attorney in Birmingham, Alabama, fighting segregation and racial injustice until their family home was firebombed in 1982. Eleanor had been 9 years old, watching from the neighbor's house as flames consumed everything they owned. Her father never stopped fighting, and neither would she. Eleanor's brother Marcus Jr., now a prominent defense attorney, after years as a prosecutor, urged caution when she called him about the threats. "Ellie, you need to recuse yourself," he insisted during their weekly Sunday dinner at her suburban home. "These people play by different rules. They're not above silencing a federal judge." Eleanor sliced her pot roast with deliberate precision, just as she dissected weak legal arguments in her courtroom. "I've spent my entire career hearing that exact sentiment from different voices, Marcus. They're not ready for a black woman judge. Certain cases are too sensitive for someone like you. I didn't listen then, and I won't start now." She set down her knife and met her brother's worried gaze. "Justice isn't blind. It sees everything but weighs without prejudice. That's been my guiding principle since law school." Marcus knew that look. It was the same determination their father had shown throughout his career. "Just promise me you'll take precautions," he finally conceded. The evening before what would become the most notorious day in the courthouse's history, Eleanor sat in her home office reviewing case files. Officer Wilson's testimony was scheduled for the morning, and something about the evidence submissions from Caldwell's department didn't align. Timestamps on digital evidence had inconsistencies. Chain of custody documentation showed peculiar gaps. Reports contained contradictory witness statements. As midnight approached, Eleanor compiled her observations into a detailed list of questions for the morning session. Her phone buzzed with a final warning text from an unknown number. Some lessons need physical teaching. She forwarded it to the Judicial Security team before setting her alarm. As Judge Eleanor Mitchell drifted to sleep, she had no way of knowing that in less than 12 hours, her courtroom would become the epicenter of a case that would shake the foundations of the city's power structure and expose decades of corruption. She could not have imagined that her unwavering commitment to justice would nearly cost her life, but ultimately bring down an entire criminal empire that had operated with impunity for generations. The next morning, as she donned her judicial robe and checked her appearance in the mirror, she repeated her personal mantra, "Justice sees everything but ways without prejudice." With quiet determination, she headed to her courtroom ready to hear Officer Wilson's testimony against some of the most powerful men in the city's police department. Richard Caldwell straightened his designer tie as his custom Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished floor of police headquarters. 22 years on the force had taught him that appearances mattered, especially when you operated in the shadows. His rise through the ranks had been meteoric, despite the 37 civilian complaints filed against him over the years. Those complaints disappeared into administrative black holes buried by a system he had carefully corrupted from within. Born into wealth in the exclusively white neighborhood of Lakeview Heights, Richard had learned early lessons about power from his father, Commissioner Harold Caldwell, who ran the police department with an iron fist for 18 years. "There are two kinds of people in this world, son," his father often said during their Sunday drives through the segregated neighborhoods. "Those who deserve our protection and those who exist to serve them. Never confuse the two." The elder Caldwell had ensured his son's swift progression through the ranks, and even after his death, the network of loyal officers remained intact. Richard expanded this inheritance into what department insiders called the Brotherhood, a shadow organization spanning 3 precincts with tendrils reaching into City Hall, the courthouse, and business community. What had begun as a protection racket for wealthy citizens evolved under Richard's leadership into something far more sinister and profitable. For the past 8 years, the Brotherhood had facilitated and protected a child trafficking operation that catered to some of the city's most powerful figures. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity: identify vulnerable children primarily from disadvantaged neighborhoods, use police resources to ensure they disappeared properly, and deliver them to clients who paid astronomical sums for their AT services. The operation had run flawlessly until Officer James Wilson stumbled upon a late-night meeting at the Riverfront Warehouse District. Wilson, a patrol officer with an unfortunate sense of ethics, had reported his suspicions about special package deliveries to his superior, unaware that Captain Reynolds was a founding member of the Brotherhood. The situation had been manageable until Wilson filed an official report that couldn't be simply deleted. When intimidation failed to silence him, more direct measures became necessary. The beating was supposed to send a message and discredit Wilson as mentally unstable. Instead, it had landed in Judge Eleanor Mitchell's courtroom, the one place in the judicial system Caldwell couldn't fully control. Richard's growing obsession with Judge Mitchell had become a concern even among his most loyal followers. In private meetings, he referred to her as uppity and not knowing her place language that made even some Brotherhood members uncomfortable. His personal vendetta against her had begun 3 years earlier when she had thrown out evidence in a major drug case, citing improper police procedures. The case had been peripheral to Brotherhood activities, but her ruling had cost them a valuable distribution channel. The previous night, Caldwell had called an emergency meeting at his lakefront property, a 5,000-square-foot mansion that his police salary could never justify. The 12 core members of the Brotherhood gathered in his wood-paneled study, drinking 18-year-old scotch, while Caldwell paced the Italian marble floor. "Mitchell is digging too deep," he announced, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler. Wilson testifies tomorrow, and she's already asking questions about evidence handling. Police Chief Walter Brennan, a tall man with silver hair and political aspirations, raised a cautionary hand. "Richard, we need to be smart here. Judge Mitchell has connections in the federal courts. Any move against her needs to be subtle." Caldwell drained his glass. "Subtle hasn't worked. The warnings were ignored. Tomorrow she'll understand what happens when she pushes too far." Detective Samuel Reynolds, the youngest of the inner circle, shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. "I've noticed suits watching the courthouse. Same 3 people for 2 weeks now. Could be federal." Caldwell dismissed the concern with a wave. "Probably law students observing. Mitchell has that mentorship program with State University." Chief Brennan wasn't convinced. "Still, we should proceed with caution." "Your point will be made without anything physical." But Caldwell had stopped listening already, texting Dr. Philip Lawson, the Brotherhood's source for prescription medications and medical expertise. "Need something for focus tomorrow," he typed, the usual plus something extra. The doctor's response came quickly. "Not advisable to mix. Side effects include impaired judgment and aggression." Caldwell sent back only "bring it." As the meeting concluded, the members performed their ritual handshake, a gesture inherited from Caldwell's father's era, symbolizing their bond above the law. Only Reynolds hesitated slightly before clasping Caldwell's hand. The morning of the incident, Caldwell sat in his black SUV outside the courthouse, swallowing the combination of pills Dr. Lawson had reluctantly provided. He felt a strange surge of energy and clarity, as if the world had suddenly come into sharper focus. The badge felt heavier against his chest, the gun at his hip more present than usual. His phone buzzed with messages from Brotherhood members positioned throughout the courthouse, confirming Wilson's arrival with his attorney. Everything was in place. As Richard Caldwell climbed the courthouse steps, a sense of invincibility washed over him. Today, Judge Eleanor Mitchell would learn the lesson his father had taught him long ago. Some people weren't meant to have power over others. Some people needed to be reminded of their place in the natural order. Little did he know that his carefully constructed world was already crumbling, and that his actions in the next hour would accelerate its complete destruction. The Brotherhood had existed in shadows for decades, but today those shadows would be flooded with the harsh light of justice triggered by his own hand. Detective Richard Caldwell adjusted his tie one final time before entering the courthouse, unaware that this would be the last day he would walk the halls as a free man. The tension in courtroom 3B crackled like static electricity before a lightning strike. Officer James Wilson sat rigidly at the witness table, his police uniform pressed to perfection, a stark contrast to the yellowish bruise still visible along his jawline. His attorney, Sophia Rodriguez, arranged documents before them with practiced precision, occasionally glancing toward the unusually crowded gallery. Judge Eleanor Mitchell noticed it immediately upon taking the bench, the abnormal number of uniformed officers lining the back wall, their expressions collectively grim and unwelcoming. She counted 17 officers, not required for court security, creating an atmosphere of intimidation that made her jaw tighten. The court will now hear testimony in the matter of Wilson versus the Metropolitan Police Department. She announced, her voice carrying the same measured authority it had for 15 years. "I remind all present that this is a federal proceeding and appropriate decorum will be maintained." Her gaze lingered momentarily on Detective Caldwell, who sat with unusual stillness at the department's table, his eyes slightly unfocused despite appearing alert. Throughout the morning proceedings, Caldwell's behavior grew increasingly concerning. He whispered constantly to the officers seated nearest him, dispatching some on mysterious errands only to have them return minutes later. His leg bounced with nervous energy beneath the table, and twice he interrupted Wilson's attorney with objections, despite having no standing to do so. The pivotal moment arrived when Officer Wilson began describing what he had witnessed 3 months earlier at the Riverfront Warehouse District. "I was completing my regular patrol route when I observed 4 department vehicles parked behind Warehouse 12. Wilson testified, his voice steady, despite the hostile stares from his colleagues. This was unusual as the area wasn't on any patrol route. I recognized Detective Caldwell's vehicle among them. Judge Mitchell watched Caldwell's face darken as Wilson continued. I maintained surveillance from a distance and observed Detective Caldwell, Captain Reynolds, and officers Burke and Michaels escorting what appeared to be 3 minors into the building. The children looked disoriented, possibly sedated. Wilson then provided specific dates and locations of similar incidents he had documented over 6 months. As Wilson testified, Judge Mitchell referenced the evidence logs on her bench computer, noting the discrepancies that had troubled her the previous evening. "Officer Wilson," she interrupted, "these incidents you've described on April 27th and May 14th, did you include them in your official report, filed on June 2nd? Wilson nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, including photographs taken from my personal phone." Judge Mitchell's fingers flew across her keyboard. "Yet those photographs do not appear in the evidence inventory submitted by Detective Caldwell's team. Can you explain this discrepancy, Detective Caldwell?" The courtroom fell silent as all eyes turned to Caldwell, whose complexion had taken on a reddish hue. "Evidence was processed according to department protocol," he responded, his voice unusually tight. "If certain materials weren't included, they were deemed irrelevant or compromised." Judge Mitchell removed her reading glasses, fixing Caldwell with a direct stare. "That determination isn't yours to make once evidence has been submitted to this court. I am ordering a complete forensic examination of all evidence handling logs related to this case, particularly those you personally oversaw, Detective." The words had barely left her mouth when Caldwell erupted from his chair. "You people always think you know better than those actually keeping this city safe." The racial undertone of "you people" sent a ripple through the courtroom. Security Officer Marcus Johnson, the only black bailiff in the federal courthouse, immediately moved toward Caldwell, his hand raised in a calming gesture. "Sir, you need to take your seat or leave the courtroom." Caldwell's response was to shove Officer Johnson with such force that the larger man stumbled backward into the gallery railing. What happened next occurred in a terrible slow motion that would later be replayed on every news network nationwide. Detective Richard Caldwell, 22-year veteran of the police force, lunged toward the bench with a primal sound that wasn't quite a word. Judge Mitchell rose her expression, showing no fear, only the indignation of her office violated. As she opened her mouth to order his removal, Caldwell vaulted over the judicial partition separating the gallery from the bench. His momentum carried him directly into Judge Mitchell, knocking her backward. Her head struck the edge of her chair as she fell. And then, in a moment of madness that would define the rest of his life, Detective Caldwell delivered a kick to the fallen judge's face. Blood immediately appeared on Judge Mitchell's cheek where his boot had connected. For one eternal second, the entire courtroom seemed suspended in disbelief. Court reporter Angela Rivera, despite the chaos unfolding before her, continued to record every word, her fingers flying across her stenotype machine, even as tears formed in her eyes. Officer Wilson instinctively pulled young legal intern Sarah Patel away from the violence while reaching for his phone to record what was happening. "Has a police officer ever made you feel unsafe? Do you believe our justice system treats everyone equally regardless of their position or race?" Comment number 1. If you think there should be harsher penalties for law enforcement officers who abuse their power, or number 2, if you believe they deserve more leniency given the stresses of their job. Like and subscribe to see more stories of corruption exposed and justice served. What happens next in this courtroom will shock you to your core. How could a respected detective fall so far as to assault a federal judge? What pushed him over the edge? And who were those 3 mysterious figures in the back of the courtroom reaching for their badges? The truth is more twisted than anyone could imagine. The courtroom erupted into chaos as 3 individuals in the back row simultaneously stood and drew federal badges. FBI. "Everybody freeze." The commanding voice belonged to Special Agent Danielle Carter, a 43-year-old veteran agent with 16 years of distinguished service. Flanking her were Agents Marcus Washington and Thomas Chen, their weapons not drawn but hands positioned to access them if necessary. The 3 agents had been disguised as law students observing court proceedings for the past 3 weeks. Part of Judge Mitchell's established mentorship program that regularly brought legal observers into her courtroom. Their notebooks, contained not class notes, but detailed observations of courtroom irregularities, officer behaviors, and specific interactions between Detective Caldwell and his network of associates. "This courtroom is now secured under federal authority," Agent Carter announced, her voice cutting through the panicked shouting. "All exits are covered. Everyone remain where you are." As she spoke, additional agents appeared at each doorway, confirming her words. Agent Washington immediately moved toward Judge Mitchell, who was attempting to sit up despite the blood trickling down her face. Meanwhile, Agent Chen placed himself between Caldwell and the judge, his stance making it clear that any further movement would be met with immediate response. The FBI's presence wasn't coincidental. For 6 months, a specialized task force had been conducting Operation Gavel Drop, investigating suspected corruption and trafficking activities centered around Detective Caldwell and extending throughout multiple levels of the city's power structure. What had begun as a statistical analysis of case closures in the department had evolved into one of the most significant public corruption investigations in the Bureau's recent history. The courtroom was quickly transformed into a secure scene. Medical personnel who had been stationed nearby, in anticipation of potential trouble, rushed to Judge Mitchell's side. The judge, displaying remarkable composure despite her injury, waved off attempts to transport her to a hospital. "I'm staying," she insisted, pressing a cloth to her bleeding cheek. "This is my courtroom." Agent Carter approached the bench, her expression professionally neutral despite the gravity of what they had just witnessed. "Judge Mitchell, we advised you to recuse yourself from this case, given our ongoing investigation. We had intelligence suggesting Detective Caldwell might react unpredictably." Judge Mitchell's eyes flashed with the same determination that had defined her career. "And I told you then what I'm telling you now, Agent Carter. I don't step aside because someone threatens me. If I did, I would never have made it through my first year on the bench." The two women shared a look of mutual respect born from similar experiences navigating male-dominated institutions. Agent Carter nodded, once acknowledging the judge's resolve, before turning her attention to the now restrained Detective Caldwell. Agent Washington had personally secured Caldwell's hands behind his back with zip ties rather than standard handcuffs, a deliberate choice to deny him the professional courtesy typically extended to law enforcement. "Richard Caldwell, you are under arrest for assaulting a federal judge, obstruction of justice, and as a person of interest in an ongoing human trafficking investigation," Washington stated, his voice carrying throughout the now silent courtroom. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As Caldwell was being processed, Agent Chen approached Officer Wilson, who remained protectively near intern Sarah Patel. "Officer Wilson, we need to move you and your family immediately. Our protective detail is waiting outside." Wilson's eyes widened in understanding. "My wife and daughter, they're at home. If Caldwell's people think I've talked," Chen nodded grimly. "A team is already en route to secure them. Your testimony today accelerated our timeline, but we've been preparing extraction protocols for key witnesses for weeks." Throughout the courtroom, FBI technical specialists were already collecting and securing evidence. The entire incident had been captured from multiple angles by surveillance equipment hidden throughout the courtroom 3 days earlier, providing high-definition footage of the assault that would prove unimpeachable in court. The courtroom's regular security cameras had been subtly augmented without the knowledge of court security, ensuring that even if local officials attempted to alter or delete footage, the FBI would maintain pristine evidence. Agent Washington made a surprising discovery while securing Caldwell's personal effects. The detective's phone contained an encrypted messaging app known to be used exclusively by a network the FBI had code-named the Gatekeeper Circle, suspected of facilitating trafficking operations across state lines. This physical evidence, directly in Caldwell's possession, would prove crucial in connecting him to operations the detective had previously maintained plausible deniability about. Within 30 minutes of the assault, Judge Mitchell had been moved to the judge's chambers, where she insisted on giving an immediate sworn statement despite her injuries. A court physician sutured the 3-centimeter laceration on her cheekbone while she dictated a meticulous account of the events leading up to the assault, including the threatening messages she had received and preserved as evidence. "I want this on record now. While the details are fresh," she explained to Agent Carter, who personally took her statement, "and I want to be part of whatever happens next." Carter shared a glance with her fellow agents before responding. "Judge Mitchell, what happens next is the complete dismantling of a criminal network that has operated with impunity in this city for decades. Detective Caldwell's assault was unfortunate, but it has given us probable cause to execute warrants we've been building for months." She hesitated before adding, "The network is extensive and includes individuals at nearly every level of city government and law enforcement. This will get very ugly before it's over." Judge Mitchell's expression remained resolute as the physician finished the final suture. "Good," she said simply. "It's long overdue." As the secured courthouse began processing the day's extraordinary events, none of the participants fully grasped how Detective Caldwell's moment of uncontrolled rage would ultimately lead to the exposure and dismantling of a disparticipants criminal enterprise that had corrupted the city's institutions for generations. The hidden watchers had seen everything, documented the connections, and were now poised to bring the full weight of federal justice against a network that had operated in shadows for far too long. Outside the courthouse, news vans were already assembling as word of a federal lockdown spread. Within hours, the footage of a white police detective assaulting a black female federal judge would circulate worldwide, becoming the visible spark that ignited a much larger inferno of justice. Agent Carter's phone buzzed with a message from FBI headquarters: "Operation Judicious now active. All teams green light." The real work was just beginning. The downtown FBI field office transformed into a command center within hours of Caldwell's arrest. Operation Judicious. The expanded investigation triggered by the courthouse incident mobilized over 100 agents across 6 specialized units. Massive digital displays covered the walls of the conference room, mapping known associates, businesses, financial connections, and suspected victims of what they now understood was a sprawling criminal enterprise with Detective Caldwell as just one of its primary enforcers. Special Agent Danielle Carter stood before the central screen addressing the assembled team. "Caldwell's phone has given us everything we needed." Digital forensics cracked his encryption and found communications with 37 confirmed network members, including judges, attorneys, business leaders, and politicians. She gestured to a network diagram that resembled a sinister spider web. "We've identified Judge Raymond Pearson and Assistant District Attorney Michael Collins as judicial insiders. Both have signed off on dozens of questionable warrants and case dismissals that benefited the network." Agent Thomas Chen took over the briefing, bringing up a new screen showing surveillance photos. The network specifically targeted minority children from underfunded school districts for their trafficking operations. "Our analysis shows 87% of the suspected victims came from predominantly Black and Hispanic neighborhoods, with an additional preference for foster children and runaways who would be less likely to be reported missing or actively searched for." This revelation sent a ripple of disgust through the room. The racial component of the trafficking operation added another layer of depravity to an already horrific criminal enterprise. While the command center buzzed with activity, a security alert came through from Judge Mitchell's residence. 2 men had attempted to break in, but were intercepted by FBI agents positioned around her property. The suspects claimed to be utility workers, but carried no identification and drove a vehicle with stolen plates. This attempted intrusion confirmed the network was already making desperate moves to silence potential witnesses and destroy evidence. Simultaneously, the courthouse video had leaked online despite efforts to secure all footage. The graphic images of Detective Caldwell's boot connecting with Judge Mitchell's face sparked immediate nationwide outrage and protests. Hashtags demanding justice flooded social media platforms, bringing unexpected public pressure that both helped and complicated the FBI's operation. The investigation quickly identified 3 primary front businesses through which the network laundered money and facilitated its operations. Riverview Property Management, the Caldwell Family Foundation, and the Lakeshore Youth Initiative. Each organization presented a respectable public face while concealing darker purposes. Riverview Property Management owned the warehouses where children were temporarily held. The Caldwell Family Foundation provided a tax shelter for illegal proceeds. And, most disturbingly, the Lakeshore Youth Initiative gave the network direct access to vulnerable children through mentorship programs and after-school activities. Financial investigation specialists uncovered offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Singapore, and Liechtenstein, with transactions totaling over $30 million over the past decade. The money trail connected directly to several prominent city officials, including 2 city council members and the chairman of the Police Oversight Committee, revealing how thoroughly the network had corrupted the systems designed to provide checks and balances. As Judge Mitchell recovered at home, under protection FBI analysts began scrutinizing her previous cases, identifying a pattern of network interference. Cases that threatened network activities had been mysteriously reassigned evidence, had disappeared, and witnesses had recanted testimonies after unexplained meetings with police officials. The judge had unknowingly been battling this shadow organization throughout her career without realizing the full scope of what she faced. A particularly disturbing development came when Governor Preston Williams held a press conference calling for calm and restraint while characterizing the courthouse incident as an unfortunate interaction being exploited for political purposes. His careful avoidance of condemning Caldwell's actions raised immediate red flags with Agent Carter, who instructed her team to expand their investigation to include the governor's office and financial records. The most significant breakthrough came 48 hours after Caldwell's arrest, when FBI cyber specialists discovered a cloud server containing the network's blackmail material. The encrypted files included compromising photos and videos of prominent officials, judges, and business leaders explaining how the network maintained control over key positions in the city. Among these materials were recordings of Governor Williams accepting bribes to appoint specific judges to the state court and directing state contracts to network-affiliated businesses. Agent Carter personally briefed FBI Director Jonathan Reynolds on this development via secure video conference. "Sir, this goes higher than we initially assessed. Governor Williams appears to be a central figure, not a peripheral player." The director's expression remained grave. "The political fallout will be significant. The governor has powerful allies in Washington. Proceed with extreme caution, but proceed nonetheless. This investigation cannot be influenced by political considerations." Carter nodded. "Understood, sir. We're also connecting previously dismissed missing children cases to network activities. Detective Caldwell personally handled 23 cases involving children who fit the profile of trafficking victims. None were resolved, and the pattern suggests these were children selected for the network's operations. As the investigation expanded, the true horror of the network's activities became clearer. Not only had they trafficked children for sexual exploitation, but they had systematically targeted minority communities, believing these victims would receive less attention from media and law enforcement. This racial component of their operation revealed a deeply disturbing ideology underpinning the criminal enterprise. By the end of the first week, Operation Judicious had identified over 60 individuals directly involved in the network's activities, and nearly 100 more who had enabled its operations through willful blindness or passive aid. Cooperation. The scale of corruption shocked even veteran agents, revealing how a criminal organization had effectively captured significant portions of the city's government, law enforcement, and judicial system. Agent Carter updated Judge Mitchell daily, knowing the judge's unique perspective provided valuable context for the investigation. During one such briefing at Mitchell's home, the judge revealed a theory she had been developing. "The threatening messages I received mentioned my father. Specifically," she explained, pointing to evidence photos of the notes. "The references were too personal, too specific to be random intimidation. Someone in this network had a connection to my family going back decades." Carter agreed to investigate this angle, assigning Agent Washington to review historical cases involving Judge Mitchell's father from his civil rights attorney days. As Operation Judicious completed its first week, the network that had operated with impunity for decades found itself increasingly exposed to the harsh light of federal investigation. Each new revelation connected more dots in a picture of corruption that would ultimately shock the nation and transform the city's institutions forever. What had begun with a single act of violence against a federal judge was expanding into one of the most significant public corruption cases in recent history, with implications that would reach the highest levels of state government. As news of the FBI investigation spread through the network's ranks, a desperate scramble for self-preservation began. Private lines buzzed with coded warnings. Document shredders worked overtime in offices throughout the city, and witnesses reported being approached with combinations of threats and bribes to remain silent. The network, though wounded, remained dangerous, with members who had everything to lose if the full extent of their crimes came to light. Police Chief Walter Brennan held an emergency press conference on the courthouse steps, positioning himself as shocked and appalled by Detective Caldwell's actions. The behavior exhibited by Detective Caldwell represents a profound betrayal of our department's values, he declared to assembled reporters, his silver hair catching the sunlight as cameras flashed. We are cooperating fully with federal authorities to ensure justice is served. Behind the scenes, however, Chief Brennan was sending very different messages. FBI surveillance captured him making late-night calls to network members, warning them to clean house and follow contingency protocols. His public support for the investigation, while privately working to undermine it, exemplified the two-faced nature of the corruption that had infected the city's institutions. Judge Eleanor Mitchell faced a coordinated backlash campaign orchestrated by network supporters. Social media platforms flooded with racist and sexist attacks, questioning her qualifications, temperament, and impartiality. Doctored photos and fabricated stories about her personal life circulated, widely amplified by accounts later traced to organizations funded by network members. The digital assault extended to the physical world when death threats began targeting not only Judge Mitchell but her family as well. Her daughter Zoe, a 30-year-old medical student at the state university, reported being followed by unmarked vehicles between her apartment and the hospital. Her son Andre, who taught history at a local high school, discovered his car vandalized with racial slurs in the faculty parking lot. Despite FBI protection details assigned to both children, the psychological toll was significant. District Attorney Victoria Harmon presented another obstacle to the investigation. Despite clear connections to Caldwell's network through campaign contributions and social relationships, Harmon refused to recuse herself from the case. This office will oversee any prosecutions resulting from this matter, as is our legal responsibility, she announced, attempting to maintain control over which charges would be filed and against whom. Agent Carter immediately moved to supersede the DA's authority with federal charges, initiating a jurisdictional battle that threatened to complicate the legal proceedings. The network's media allies mobilized quickly. Clayton Morris, a popular radio personality with a daily audience of 300,000 listeners, launched relentless attacks on Judge Mitchell's character and the FBI's investigation. Ask yourself why a judge with known anti-police bias was handling this case in the first place, he urged his audience daily. And why did the FBI happen to be in that exact courtroom at that exact moment? This was a setup from the beginning, folks. A political witch hunt targeting law enforcement. The most alarming escalation came 5 days after Caldwell's arrest, when Judge Mitchell's home was vandalized with racial slurs spray-painted across the front door and windows. The FBI security detail intercepted 2 armed men attempting to approach through the rear garden. Gunfire was exchanged with one suspect wounded and captured while the other escaped. The captured suspect, later identified as former officer Jason Reynolds, refused to cooperate, but his phone contained direct communications with Chief Brennan from earlier that same day. Meanwhile, the protective detail assigned to Officer Wilson and his family discovered a sophisticated tracking device attached to their vehicle during a routine security sweep. The device contained technology available only to law enforcement, suggesting that someone within the department had compromised their location. This discovery necessitated moving the Wilson family to a secondary safe house under even tighter security protocols. Despite mounting threats, Judge Mitchell refused the FBI's suggestion to temporarily relocate out of state. "If I run now, everything I've fought for means nothing," she told Agent Carter during a security briefing in her kitchen, the covered windows casting unusual shadows across her still bruised face. "Besides, every federal judge in this circuit is watching how I respond. If I show fear, it undermines the entire judiciary." Recognizing the validity of her stance, the FBI instead converted her home into a virtual fortress with agents stationed throughout the property and advanced surveillance systems monitoring all approaches. In a bold move to counter the network's judicial influence, Judge Mitchell arranged a secret meeting with 5 federal judges she implicitly trusted. The gathering, held in Judge Alan Rosenberg's home under the guise of a dinner party, allowed the judges to coordinate their response to evidence of judicial corruption. They established protocols to review each other's warrants related to the investigation, ensuring that no single compromised judge could derail the legal proceedings. The network grew increasingly desperate as the FBI's net tightened. In a particularly egregious attempt to discredit the investigation, evidence emerged suggesting an effort to frame Agent Marcus Washington for evidence tampering. Anonymous tips to internal affairs and carefully planted false documentation attempted to create the appearance that Washington had fabricated evidence against Caldwell. The clumsy frame job ultimately backfired, providing investigators with additional evidence of obstruction and clear links to Police Commissioner Raymond Wilson, who had authorized the internal investigation into Agent Washington based on obviously fraudulent claims. Have you ever witnessed corruption firsthand? Would you have the courage to stand up against a powerful system that threatens your life and family? Comment number 1, if you believe whistleblowers deserve greater protection, or number 2, if you think loyalty to institutions should come first. Like and subscribe to see how this brave judge and FBI team continue to dismantle this criminal empire despite the dangers. The network is fighting back with everything they have, but what they don't realize is that their desperate actions are only providing more evidence against them. Who else is involved in this conspiracy that reaches to the highest levels of power? What happened to Judge Mitchell's father that connects to this present danger? And how far will network members go to silence those who threaten their freedom? The truth becomes more shocking with each new revelation. At 4:30 in the morning, 13 days after Caldwell's courtroom assault, Operation Judicious launched its coordinated takedown phase. Pre-dawn raids simultaneously hit 14 locations across the city, targeting key network facilities and high-ranking members. The operation involved over 200 federal agents supported by trusted state police units, specifically selected from jurisdictions outside the network's influence. FBI tactical teams surrounded the Riverfront Warehouse Complex, the primary site identified for trafficking operations. "FBI, we have a federal warrant, exit with your hands visible." The amplified command echoed across the water as agents in body armor secured all access points. Inside Warehouse, 12 agents discovered 7 minors being held in converted office spaces, all showing signs of sedation and mistreatment. Medical teams immediately transported the children to specialized facilities, while evidence response units processed what would become the most damning crime scene in the case. Across town, SWAT teams breached Police Chief Walter Brennan's lakefront mansion only to find the residence empty of occupants. A housekeeper informed agents that Brennan had left suddenly the previous evening with packed luggage. An alert was immediately issued to all airports and border crossings. 3 hours later, facial recognition software at a private airfield 80 miles north of the city identified Brennan attempting to board a chartered plane to Belize, a country with no extradition treaty with the United States. Local sheriff's deputies unaffiliated with the compromised city police intercepted and arrested him as he walked across the tarmac. From a secure FBI facility, Judge Mitchell signed emergency warrants throughout the morning, ensuring all legal procedures were meticulously followed despite the extraordinary circumstances. Her facial bruising had faded to yellowish green, but she still carried herself with the same unwavering dignity that had defined her courtroom. Each warrant she signed was countersigned by Judge Alan Rosenberg to create redundant legal protection against future challenges to the investigation's legitimacy. The documents discovered during the raids painted an even more disturbing picture than investigators had anticipated. The network maintained detailed records of their trafficking victims categorized by race, age, and physical characteristics. Most horrifying was the discovery of a discriminatory pricing structure that explicitly assigned lower values to Black and Hispanic children, revealing the deeply racist ideology underlying the criminal enterprise. Beyond the trafficking operation, evidence emerged of the network's involvement in judicial manipulation, election fraud, and systematic obstruction of investigations into its members' activities. High-profile arrests shocked the community throughout the day. Reverend Thomas Williams, pastor of the city's largest megachurch, was taken into custody during his morning service, charged with laundering money through church accounts. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the respected dean of the State University's law school, was arrested for her role in identifying vulnerable students for recruitment into network activities. Perhaps most stunning was the arrest of Ronald Peterson, a beloved local philanthropist whose charitable foundation had been a front for moving trafficking victims across state lines under the guise of youth opportunity programs. The investigation delivered another significant blow when it revealed that Judge Eleanor Mitchell's former law school mentor had been a network enabler for decades. Williams had used his position as chief administrative judge to strategically assign cases that threatened network activities to judges known to be sympathetic to law enforcement, steering sensitive matters away from judges like Mitchell, who might scrutinize evidence too carefully. The operation took a dramatic turn when evidence connected the network to 3 cold case murders of potential whistleblowers from previous years. The remains of former Internal Affairs investigator Robert Chen, who had disappeared 5 years earlier while investigating police corruption, were discovered buried beneath a recently poured concrete floor in one of the network's warehouse properties. His case files, thought lost, were recovered from a hidden safe in Chief Brennan's vacation home. As the day progressed, Governor Preston Williams called an emergency press conference, presumably to address the widening scandal engulfing his administration. In a telling development, the governor never appeared. 10 minutes after the scheduled start time, his chief of staff emerged to announce a family emergency necessitating the governor's immediate departure. FBI agents were already en route to the governor's mansion, with an arrest warrant based on financial records connecting him directly to trafficking proceeds. The most dramatic moment of the operation came during the evening hours when Judge Mitchell's security detail thwarts an assassination attempt at her residence. A sniper positioned on a rooftop 300 yards from her home was detected by FBI counter-surveillance measures. The subsequent pursuit and arrest revealed the would-be assassin as Michael Reynolds, a former police academy classmate of Caldwell who had served as his personal security for years. Reynolds carried no identification but was armed with a military-grade rifle equipped with thermal imaging capabilities and a suppressor. Upon interrogation, Reynolds revealed he had received payment through an offshore account traced back to businesses controlled by Governor Williams. The international dimensions of the network's operations became clear as financial investigations identified connections to similar operations in 3 other countries. Interpol was brought into the investigation with agents from their human trafficking division arriving to coordinate with FBI teams. Evidence suggested the network had been exchanging victims with similar organizations abroad, creating a truly global criminal enterprise that had operated in plain sight for decades. By midnight, Operation Judicious had executed 43 arrests, rescued 21 trafficking victims, and seized assets valued at over $60 million. Evidence response teams would continue processing crime scenes for weeks, but the backbone of the network had been broken in a single coordinated day of action. Agent Carter delivered a preliminary briefing to Judge Mitchell in the judge's home study as the operation wound down. "We've cut off the head of the snake, Your Honor, but this organization has deep roots. There will be resistance, legal challenges, and likely more attempts to discredit both the investigation and you personally." Judge Mitchell nodded, reviewing the arrest logs with a prosecutor's experienced eye. I expected nothing less, Agent Carter. But today, for the first time in decades, the scales of justice in this city are beginning to balance. She paused, studying a particular name on the list. I see you arrested Judge Williams. He was once my mentor. He betrayed everything you stand for, Carter replied. The evidence against him is substantial. Judge Mitchell's expression remained unreadable. I'd like to speak with him. Carter hesitated before responding. That might not be advisable at this stage of the investigation. It wasn't a request, Agent Carter Mitchell replied, her voice carrying the same authority that had commanded her courtroom for 15 years. There are questions. Only he can answer questions that have waited 40 years for resolution. The significance of her statement wasn't lost on Carter, who recalled the investigation into Mitchell's father's case that Agent Washington had been conducting. I'll arrange it, she finally agreed, but with full security protocols in place. As dawn broke on a new day, the city awakened to headlines announcing the dismantling of what prosecutors were calling the most extensive corruption and trafficking network in state history. Citizens gathered outside the federal courthouse, many holding signs supporting Judge Mitchell and the FBI investigation. The takedown had begun, but the full reckoning with decades of entrenched corruption still lay ahead. The most difficult questions remained unanswered. How had such evil flourished for so long in plain sight, and could the city's institutions ever fully recover from such profound betrayal? The Federal Detention Center's interview room had been designed for utility, not comfort. Bare white walls surrounded a simple metal table, bolted to the floor with fixed chairs on either side. Video cameras monitored from multiple angles, their red recording lights the only spots of color in the colorless space. Judge Eleanor Mitchell sat perfectly straight, hands folded on the table before her as the heavy door opened to admit the man she had come to question. Richard Caldwell shuffled in, wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands and feet shackled. The once imposing detective had visibly deteriorated during his 2 weeks in custody. His previously immaculate appearance had given way to unkempt stubble and dark circles beneath bloodshot eyes. He moved with the jerky mannerisms of someone experiencing mild withdrawal symptoms, likely from being denied the prescription medications he had abused for years. Judge Mitchell. He acknowledged, his voice carrying a mixture of surprise and contempt as guards secured his restraints to the table fixture. Come to gloat. Eleanor studied him with the same impassive expression she had maintained through countless difficult testimonies in her courtroom. I've come for answers, Detective Caldwell. Nothing more. Behind the one-way glass, Agent Danielle Carter watched with Agent Washington, both concerned about the judge's insistence on this meeting. She shouldn't be in there, Washington muttered. He's unstable and has nothing to lose. Carter nodded but responded. She earned this conversation. Besides, she might get something from him we couldn't. Inside the interview room, Mitchell began methodically. Your network has been dismantled, Detective. Governor Williams is in custody. Chief Brennan is cooperating with prosecutors. The warehouses have been searched, the offshore accounts frozen, and the victims are providing testimony. She delivered these facts without emotion, as if reading a grocery list. Caldwell's response cycled rapidly between denial threats and attempts at justification. This witch hunt won't stand in court. You have no idea who you're really up against. We provided a service to people who run this country, not just this city. His eyes darted around the room as he spoke, never settling on any point for long. You think you've won? This goes higher than you can possibly imagine. Mitchell remained unmoved by his increasingly agitated performance. Your psychological deterioration is noted, but it doesn't interest me. I have specific questions about operations predating your involvement. This unexpected direction momentarily steadied Caldwell. What are you talking about? Mitchell removed a photograph from a folder and placed it on the table. It showed a burned-out house from the early 1980s police tape surrounding the charred structure. Birmingham, Alabama. April 14, 1982. A civil rights attorney's home was firebombed after he filed a discrimination lawsuit against the police department. Understanding dawned in Caldwell's eyes, followed by a cruel smile. Mitchell. The house belonged to Marcus Mitchell. That was your father. Eleanor's expression remained professional, betraying no emotion despite the personal connection. The case was never solved. The FBI has been reviewing it as potentially connected to your network's historical operations. Caldwell leaned forward as far as his restraints allowed, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Your daddy was warned just like you were. Some lessons need physical teaching. That's been our philosophy for generations. The implication hung in the air between them. Mitchell pressed further. You weren't old enough to be involved, but your father was Police Commissioner Harold Caldwell at the time. My father understood how the world really works. Some people need to stay in their place for society to function properly. Caldwell's racist ideology emerged more explicitly as his facade crumbled. He made sure troublemakers faced consequences, especially those trying to change the natural order. As the interview progressed, Mitchell methodically extracted confirmation of what Agent Washington's investigation had already suggested. Caldwell's father had been responsible for coordinating harassment against her family, culminating in the firebombing that had destroyed their home and forced them to flee Alabama. More significantly, Mitchell produced evidence that the elder Caldwell had personally covered up 3 racially motivated killings in the 1970s, establishing a pattern of behavior that his son would later expand into the current criminal enterprise. Your organization didn't begin with you, Mitchell observed. You inherited it just like you inherited your father's prejudices. Caldwell's composure fractured further as she laid out the connections. You think you understand, but you don't see the big picture. I was just maintaining what came before, what will continue after me. Governor Williams founded the modern network, not me. He has the connections that matter. This confirmation of the governor's central role was valuable intelligence, but Mitchell continued her personal line of questioning. When did you become aware of my appointment to the federal bench? Caldwell's laugh held no humor. We knew the day your name was submitted for consideration. We tried to block it through senators we owned, but you had too many powerful supporters. The revelation that her judicial appointment had been actively opposed by the network explained the unusual delays and questioning she had experienced during the confirmation process. You've been targeting my courtroom specifically for years, haven't you? Caldwell didn't bother denying it. You were flagged as problematic from day one. Too thorough, too independent. We made sure the important cases went elsewhere whenever possible. The conversation took an unexpected turn when Mitchell produced a newspaper clipping showing a car accident from 7 years earlier. Jackson Mitchell, investigative journalist, my husband. The brake line failure was ruled accidental. Caldwell's expression shifted subtly, a mixture of recognition and calculation crossing his features. Some accidents aren't accidents, Judge. Your husband was asking questions about certain financial arrangements between the governor's office and development contracts, getting too close to our funding sources. The confirmation of what Eleanor had long suspected, the accident that killed her husband had been an assassination, sent a barely perceptible tremor through her composed exterior. Agent Carter tensed, watching from behind the glass, but Mitchell maintained her professional demeanor. How high does this go, Detective? Beyond the governor, who protects your network, sensing leverage, Caldwell leaned forward. I want a deal, full immunity. You're facing multiple life sentences for trafficking minors, Detective. Immunity isn't on the table. Then enjoy never knowing who really pulls the strings. Caldwell settled back, a smug expression briefly replacing his agitation. There are senators, federal judges, even cabinet-level officials who've used our services. Governor Williams answers to them, not the other way around. Before Mitchell could pursue this claim, alarm lights began flashing in the corridor outside. A security breach had been detected elsewhere in the facility. Agent Carter immediately entered the interview room. We need to move you now, Judge Mitchell. There's been an incident on the East Wing. As they secured Caldwell and prepared to transfer Mitchell to a safe location, the detective called after her. You think you're winning, but you have no idea what's coming. They'll burn down the whole system before letting you expose them. The security breach, later determined to be an attempt by former police officers to access the detention center's control room, necessitated an emergency evacuation of key personnel, including Judge Mitchell. Subsequent investigation would reveal that several guards had been bribed to facilitate an operation likely intended to silence Caldwell permanently, as his increasingly unstable behavior made him a liability to remaining network members. As Agent Carter escorted Judge Mitchell to a secure vehicle, the judge remained deep in thought, processing the revelations from her confrontation with Caldwell. "He confirmed what we suspected about your husband's accident," Carter said gently. "I'm sorry." Mitchell nodded, once acknowledging but not dwelling on the painful confirmation. He also suggested connections to federal officials. "That would explain the unusual resistance we've encountered from certain quarters in Washington. We'll investigate every lead, no matter where it points," Carter assured her. "Director Reynolds has given us complete autonomy." Mitchell's expression remained resolute as they drove away from the detention center. "My father always said justice moves slowly, but it moves. After 40 years, I finally understand who targeted my family and why." She gazed out at the city streets, passing by her reflection ghostly in the bulletproof glass. "Now we need to ensure that justice moves quickly enough to prevent what remains of this network from disappearing into shadows again." The revelations from the confrontation with Caldwell would open new avenues of investigation connecting historical injustices with current corruption in ways that would ultimately expose the full generational scope of the criminal enterprise. What had begun as a single act of violence in a courtroom was revealing itself as merely the visible eruption of a systemic cancer that had metastasized throughout multiple institutions over decades. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the steps of the federal courthouse as Judge Eleanor Mitchell stood before a forest of microphones and cameras. 6 months had passed since Detective Richard Caldwell's boot had connected with her face, catalyzing the largest public corruption investigation in the state's history. The faint scar on her cheekbone, visible despite careful makeup, served as a permanent reminder of that moment. "The American justice system is imperfect," she began, her voice steady and clear. "It was designed by imperfect people and has been implemented by imperfect institutions. But its aspiration toward equal justice under law remains our nation's most noble ideal, even when we fall short of achieving it." The nationwide investigation, sparked by Operation Judicious, had expanded far beyond the original city limits. Evidence uncovered in local operations had led to related investigations in 5 additional states, revealing a network of corruption and trafficking more extensive than anyone had initially imagined. The statistics were staggering: 73 arrests, including 2 federal judges, the police commissioner and state senator Thomas Richardson. Over $40 million in criminal assets had been seized and directed toward victim support services. 29 trafficking victims had been rescued and provided with comprehensive recovery resources. Judge Mitchell had insisted on returning to the bench despite ongoing security concerns. Her first act had been to preside over the initial hearings for several network members, her presence on the bench sending a powerful message about judicial independence and resilience. Her courtroom was consistently filled to capacity with lines forming before dawn for the opportunity to witness what many now called the reclamation of justice. Officer James Wilson's testimony had proven crucial in connecting all aspects of the network's operations. His methodical documentation of suspicious activities over years had created a roadmap that prosecutors followed to build airtight cases against key members. Wilson had been offered a position with the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, though he remained undecided about leaving local law enforcement. "My father believed in policing from within the community," he explained in his widely viewed congressional testimony. "I still believe we need good officers serving the neighborhoods they understand." In an unexpected development that captured national attention, Judge Mitchell's daughter Zoe established the Restoration Foundation, focused on supporting trafficking survivors, with particular emphasis on minority victims who have historically received fewer resources and less public attention. The foundation received initial funding from assets seized from the criminal network, creating a poetic justice that transformed instruments of exploitation into tools for healing. Richard Caldwell's story had taken a dramatic turn 3 months into proceedings when he attempted suicide in his cell. The attempt failed, and during his subsequent psychiatric evaluation, he offered full cooperation in exchange for placement in a medical facility rather than maximum security prison. His testimony implicated dozens of additional participants and exposed operational details that might otherwise have remained hidden. Perhaps the most stunning revelation came 4 months after the initial arrests, when Caldwell's wife Lisa was identified as the original FBI informant who had first alerted authorities to the network's activities. Lisa Caldwell had discovered evidence of her husband's involvement when she accidentally accessed his hidden files while using his home office computer. Rather than confronting him directly, she had documented evidence for months before approaching federal authorities. Her testimony, delivered behind closed doors to protect her safety, had been instrumental in launching the initial investigation that culminated in Operation Judicious. The scope of systemic reforms implemented in the wake of the scandal was unprecedented. A judicial oversight committee headed by Judge Mitchell established new protocols for case assignment and evidence handling. Police department operations were placed under federal monitorship for a minimum of 5 years. State law was amended to create enhanced penalties for public corruption and expanded protections for whistleblowers. On the final day of Caldwell's sentencing hearing, Judge Alan Rosenberg presided as Mitchell had recused herself due to her direct involvement in the case. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Mitchell took the witness stand to deliver her victim impact statement. "The physical assault I experienced was not merely an attack on my person," she testified, her voice unwavering. "It was an attack on judicial independence, on the rule of law, and on the fundamental principle that no one stands above justice. But more significantly, it was the violent eruption of a systemic racism that has infected our institutions for generations." She looked directly at Caldwell as she continued. "The investigation revealed that your network specifically targeted minority children, devaluing their humanity based solely on the color of their skin. This perpetuated a legacy of exploitation that has deep, painful roots in our nation's history. The true victims here are not judges or institutions, but the children and families whose lives were destroyed by your actions." Her testimony left many in the courtroom in tears, including several jurors. Caldwell himself remained impassive, staring at the table before him throughout her statement. The sentences handed down reflected the gravity of the crime's multiple life terms for Caldwell Governor Williams and other key network members with no possibility of parole. Lesser participants received sentences ranging from 10 to 30 years, depending on their level of involvement and cooperation. As autumn leaves fell across the city, Judge Eleanor Mitchell visited the cemetery where her husband Jackson was buried. She knelt beside the headstone, placing fresh flowers against the marble. "It's finally over, Jack," she said softly. "They can't hurt anyone else now." The sound of footsteps on the cemetery path caused her to turn. Agent Danielle Carter approached her expression, suggesting this wasn't merely a coincidental meeting. "Judge Mitchell, I apologize for the intrusion, but this couldn't wait." She held a file folder with federal markings. "We've uncovered evidence suggesting the network's connections reach into the federal government, possibly including members of Congress and regulatory agencies." Mitchell rose slowly, brushing leaves from her coat. "Then our work isn't finished after all." "No, Your Honor," Carter agreed. "It may have only just begun." As they walked together through the cemetery, the weight of what lay ahead settled between them. The battle for justice would continue, extending beyond city limits and state lines into the corridors of national power. But they moved forward with the knowledge that no matter how deeply corruption had rooted itself in the institutions of authority, the light of accountability would continue to follow, illuminating even the darkest corners of injustice. What would you do if you discovered corruption in your own community? Has this story changed how you view the justice system? Comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if you believe stories like these need to be told. The fight against corruption and racism requires all of us to stay vigilant and demand accountability at every level. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of the most shocking cases of judicial courage and determination in recent history. Remember, justice may sometimes arrive slowly, but with enough brave individuals standing firm, it always arrives eventually. This story illustrates how systems of corruption often target the most vulnerable populations in our society. Judge Mitchell's unwavering commitment to justice, despite threats, violence, and personal loss, demonstrates the power of moral courage in the face of institutional racism. The network's specific targeting of minority children reveals how prejudice becomes weaponized when combined with power and privilege. True justice requires not just addressing individual acts of wrongdoing, but dismantling the systems that enable and protect perpetrators through layers of corruption. The multi-generational aspect of this corruption shows how deeply entrenched racist ideologies can become within institutions. What began with Caldwell's father continued through his son and expanded through political connections, highlighting how prejudice passes through generations when left unchallenged. Eleanor Mitchell's perseverance represents the resilience necessary to confront such deeply rooted injustice. Her refusal to step aside despite threats exemplifies how meaningful change often requires individuals willing to stand firm despite personal risk. This case reminds us that justice, while sometimes delayed, can ultimately prevail when dedicated individuals work together to expose wrongdoing, regardless of how powerful the perpetrators might be. The transformation of seized assets into resources for healing victims demonstrates how justice can be restorative, not merely punitive. What systems of injustice exist in your community that need to be challenged? Have you ever witnessed corruption or discrimination and wondered if speaking up could make a difference? Comment below with your thoughts on how ordinary citizens can help ensure our institutions serve everyone equally. If Judge Mitchell's courage inspired you, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of extraordinary individuals standing against powerful systems of oppression. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that fighting for justice, even against seemingly insurmountable odds, is always worth the struggle. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of the most profound examples of judicial courage in recent history. Remember, the arc of justice bends toward fairness only when brave individuals like you push it in that direction.